Good morning, good morning, good morning. It might not be morning when you're actually watching this, but hello. Um, so I think I'm gonna kill two birds with one proverbial stone. Yesterday it is early in the morning, so I'm not kind of focused, but well, I'm focused, but I'm not like amped up and all that. So let's just call this a lecture, a musings lecture, right? Um, I won't be my animated. Well, who knows what I'd be? We'll see. Um, so yesterday in my Love, Death, Desire class, we talked about the movie Final Destination a little bit, and then it just made me think about um, you know the intro class and us getting into free will next week. So I wanted to kind of take this moment since tomorrow will be we have the, we won't necessarily be in class. So I want to take this moment to remind my intro students I will be there tomorrow to go over logic puzzles. But if I don't see you, I'll see you Monday. And also, feel free to stop by the celebration of learning. We have a conversation on love that one of our senior students will be presenting, Jasmine Burns Gaines. So, you should come check her out. We'll have some goodies, some bookmarks, some candy. Stop by the booth. I think it's 4:30. All right. So look, let me just kind of get through this. Give me about 20 minutes, 30 minutes. I don't know. So the idea of free will or determinism sits at the very heart of philosophical inquiry, right? Because those ideas sort of strike at the core of what it means to be human in the world, right? If you think about it this way, if all events, all activities are already determined, right, shaped by I don't know an unbroken chain of prior conditions or set of conditions that already happened, then our sense of freely making choices, right, or actions might just be an illusion, right? And if the world is determined, and this has profound implications for how we even look at like morality and even ethics, right? How we find purpose in our lives, right? Our vision boards and things like that, right? How we conceive ourselves, how we view ourselves within the overall cosmology, the overall cosmic order. On the other hand, though, I think that if human beings, if we do possess free will, it suggests that we have, you know, a pretty strong, special capacity for self determination that sort of transcends cause and effect, the scientific aspect of cause and effect, right? We have a sense that allows ourselves to sort of shape our destinies in a meaningful way. So, we as philosophers, we wrestle with this for centuries because, bottom line, the stakes are enormous, right? Do our daily decisions genuinely create new futures, right? Or are we just kind of, you know, walking a path that's already laid out by nature, fate, by God, right? For I have known, you know, you before you were even born, or things like that that we hear in the Bible, right? So these kind of questions or dilemmas is sort of what I want to talk a little bit about today in this lecture. But I want to start with the movie Final Destination. So my Love, Death, Desire students watch Final Destinations, and I like the movie. A couple people in the class like they hadn't seen them, so they saw one. They ain't gonna look at two, three, four, and five, right? But let's start out. I thought about Final Destination. So if you haven't seen the movie, I'm not gonna get into too much of the plot, but I'll get into the overall idea. Um, if we think about Final Destination, each sort of episode, each series, each installment, I guess, revolves around characters who, one way or another, attempt to cheat death, to hide away from death, only to find themselves sort of not able to do so, and they're in this sort of inescapable kind of cosmic order, right? There's an unstoppable chain of events, right, that are dramatized. Of course, it's the movies, right? But dramatized in these movies to sort of create a vivid illustration of the first term I want you to write in your notes, intro class, det- of determinism, right? And so if we think about what determinism understands, especially as it relates to this movie, we ask the question, are our lives scripted in advance? Or do we have genuine freedom to sort of shape our realities or shape our fates, right? From a philosophical perspective, right, this is just not Hollywood talking, right? It sort of mirrors, channels a debate that has fascinated thinkers, um, you know, through ancient times, right? Plato, the Stoics, Hobbes, David Hume, Immanuel Kant, the list goes on, right? They all wrestled with how and if even human beings can act freely in a world that appears to be governed by what? Unbreakable laws of nature. Stuff that we can't control. The tension that you see on Final Destination film at its core is the same kind of intellectual debate, the same type of heat, if you will, that intellectual debates have gone through for centuries. So when we think about determinism, we're thinking about a sort of a grand chain of causes, right? Determinism holds that sort of every event in the universe, including human choices, is already determined by prior events in the law of nature. Sort of, there's a couple different things. There's like classical physical determinism. It's kind of rooted in science, like Isaac Newton, people like that, Newtonian physics that says the universe sort of is just like this grand, mechanism, this grand clockwork, right? And it just kind of ticks along, and that sort of classical physical determinism that basically everything is sort of working according to mechanical order, right? Um, it's kind of rooted in Isaac Newton kind of stuff. Um, and there are other people, a lot of philosophers who have championed that kind of idea. Um, but if all is sort of ultimately explained by mechanical causes, then one might conclude there is no such thing as freedom, only an idea of it, a fantasy of an illusion of freedom. And so in Final Destination, right, what's kind of cool about the movie is that it feels as though there's an unseen sort of causal chain or a design that how you're gonna die that ensures that each attempt to avoid it or to avoid that fate results in an alternate yet still predetermined catastrophe. I'll repeat that if you're taking notes again, especially in Final Destination. So I'm going to forward this video actually to my upper level philosophy students too. But um, in the movie, it feels though that there's a you know it's unseen behind the scenes, sort of design for death, right? And that unseen design ensures that each attempt to avoid the fate, right, it only results in an alternate yet kind of still, right, predetermined catastrophe or end, right? So under determinism, right, you have a reading from my intro students. You have a reading that that's in your reading packet, and these terms they pop up in there, so you don't have to take notes necessarily in this video, but you might as well. You have hard determinism is a term in there, and you have incompatibilism. He has some others, but I want to talk about those two real quick. Hard determinism versus soft. We'll talk soft in a minute. But hard determinism and incompatibilism, right? Incompatibilism means not compatible, right? Incompatibilism. So hard determinists take the view, um, especially in modern times, there are scientists, who sort of see that consciousness is sort of purely material, right? They hold that if determinism is true, right, then there's no free will at all. So if you believe in determinism, the hard determinists believe that free will does not exist, right? Um, and everything we do, pretty much, is inevitable, a result of our environment. It ain't my fault, right? Environment, right? Excuse me, it's the hip hop head in me. Um, Genetics, right? I couldn't control it. It was in my DNA, right? Or maybe there's some brain states that neurologically I couldn't help myself, right? And that doesn't mean you're weak in a spiritual sense. It means that there's some neurological stuff happening in your cerebellum, frontal cortex, decision, that kind of stuff. Maybe things that happen. So hard determinists believe that pretty much everything that we do is a result of either some type of neurological function, prior brain state, our environment, right? Or genetics, right? Then you have incompatibilism. Incompatibilism sort of sees that um, free will determinism, right, cannot both be true at the same time. So back to my intro class, right? We were talking about contraries and contradictions, right? So they cannot both be true at the same time, right? So incompatibilism, you know, has kind of two elements. You have the hard determinism, what we just talked about. So hard determinism, sort of, you have determinism and you can't accept free will. So on a conditional, if I use it as a conditional, if I accept determinism, then I must reject free will. That's hard determinism. But then you have a term that we call libertarianism, right? And libertarianism, liberty, freedom, right? Take the term. So libertarianism, right, rejects determinism, accepts free will. Okay? So hard determinism and libertarianism. Hard determinism, I accept determinism. If I accept determinism, I have to reject free will, or I can be a libertarian, both like Rand Paul in the Congress, but from a scientific perspective, I can reject determinism and then I accept free will. So think about the movie. For hard determinists, the character in Final Destinations, they never choose nothing. They think they are, but they never choose anything. They're pretty much acting. Excuse me. Excuse me. They're acting according to a predestined sequence of events that's beyond their control, right? So you have incompatibilism, hard determinism. There's another term called soft determinism, right? Soft determinism. Soft determinism, or maybe even we can call it a compatibilism, not incompatibilism, but compatibilism. So soft determinists or compatibilists would say something like this. They would say that a compatibilist would say something like determinism and free will cannot coexist, right? And people like David Hume, Thomas Hobbes argue that free will or free actions are those actions that stem from our internal feelings, our motivations, our desires, rather than external compulsion, right? Environment, mental states, right? DNA. Then you have sort of modern philosophers. You all might have heard me mention a philosophy and bullshit, right? That book, Frankfurt, who I like to read sometime. Frankfurt sort of refined this view, kind of thinking about it this way. He says, as long as we act on desires, right, we identify with, we conjoin, right, our actions can be considered free, even if ultimately caused by prior events. So I repeat that. Now, this is a compatibilist view, right? Remember, they're saying it can coexist. Remember, de- determinists and incompatibilists mean you can't coexist. I mean, right? It won't. A determinism mean you can't coexist determinism and free will, right? But compatibilists believe that determinism and free will can both exist at the same time, right? You have to have what? Internal motivations, right? Or, like I said, with Frankfurt, he says, well, as long as we kind of operate on our desires, our actions can be considered free, even if they were maybe even caused by prior events, right? So, what does that mean? Let's say I'm a strawberry fan, but let's just say you like chocolate ice cream and you choose chocolate ice cream because it kind of, aligns with your preferences. You prefer chocolate ice creams. Well, how did you start liking chocolate ice cream? Because you were kind of shaped by your upbringing. Your mama, your cousin, your friend, the ice cream truck only had chocolate, whatever it is, right? Well, if you chose ice cream today because it aligned with your preferences were shaped by your past, your upbringing, your physiology, or whatever. Maybe you're allergic to strawberry, whatever it is, right? So then your choice is both causally determined and free as long as no one is forcing you. Although there have been things that already in play that drove your decision. So maybe it's not totally free. Does that make sense? So again, I chose chocolate. I make a free will to choose chocolate. But was it really a free will? Because it was driven by what? Past occurrences, which already kind of designed what you're going to do by virtue of what? Maybe a physiology, environment. Maybe biology, I'm allergic. Maybe psychology, you know, the blacker the berry, the sweeter the juice. I don't know. I don't know, right? But in compatibilism, I can have both, right? That's the point, right? So how does it apply to Final Destination? Well, I think the characters they still sort of make what Frankfurt would call internally driven decisions, like they team up or they try different schemes to kind of cheat death, even if death is already determined, right? So that's kind of funny to think about when I think about the movie. Anyway, let me kind of move forward. So you got the libertarian, that free will again we talked about before, and that's incompatibilism. And the libertarian, people like I don't know philosophers. There's one called Chisholm, Roderick Chisholm, I think his name is. But people like that argue that human beings possess, um, you know, causation, right, and agency, right. Um, and this means that we are the authors of our own fate, right? We are the genuine originators of our actions, right? And only through us does it initiate new causal chains, right? A chain, a connection between what cause and effect, right? All things operate. If I do this, that happens, kind of stuff, right? But we initiate the causal chains, and they're not wholly determined by previous states, right? That's what that means, right? In terms of libertarianism. So what's the philosophical piece, right? So the philosophical piece there is this: if you're an agent, if I'm an individual, an agent, a moral agent, right? And I'm capable of originating an action, whatever that action is, and that action is not dictated by past events, if that's even possible, then determinism has no place in my conversation. It fails to account for the full story of the human choice. Again, I'm an agent, free to make decisions, and I'm originating my action, not dictated by past events, if that's possible. I keep saying that because it's easy to say, it's hard to really think out. But then, if we believe that, then determinism doesn't play in this realm. Think about a truly libertarian perspective of Final Destination, for instance, would be if a character performs, let's say, an unpredictable act that literally breaks the chain. Of course, in this film, it can't happen because again, it would catch up to him, and we see people trying to make decisions. But otherwise, that's what we mean by libertarianism. They literally try to break the chain, right? Or as religious folk will say, where we're going to what's the term? Which term they use a lot? We're going to we're going to ah, I'm missing it. But basically, we're going to not succumb to that history, right? We're going to I forgot the term now, but a lot of time they say it in church, right? We're going to stop that evil. We're going to stop that history, right? So let me just kind of give a couple examples, and then a couple scientific examples. I think I got in my notes here to say, and then let's give another popular example, and then I get out the door here. So, in science, right, you got order, cause and effect, and like I mentioned Isaac Newton earlier. In sort of Newton mechanics, Newton encourages a sort of a deterministic view. Think like dominoes, right? You got a domino, bam, and the whole thing kind of moves, falls, right? Everything falls from the first domino kind of thing, right? Quantum mechanics, for instance, for those of you science folk in the room, it sort of it introduces probabilities, which I don't know, some take as an opening for genuine indeterminism, right? But indeterminism isn't necessarily free will, right? Right? Just because it's not determined already doesn't necessarily mean it's free will. What could it be? Randomness, chaos, right? Just because I didn't choose it, and just because it wasn't ordained, doesn't mean that's the only option. Shit happens. I mean, excuse me. Stuff happens in case a kid's watching this. Stuff happens. So if I'm a neuroscientist, for instance, and I say, I think there was a study that suggests that our brains show sort of a potential to be ready before we become consciously aware of choosing an action in the first place, right? And sort of, if these scientific experiments were correct, then that kind of gives undergirding, gives fuel to the determinist perspective that our conscious decisions might be sort of illusions, right? I don't know. Let me think about that, but we may talk about that in class after next week. So listen, let me give you the story. So you're on the campus of Wittenberg University, and you and your friends plan to go to Station One. Shout out to Station One at 8 p.m. Okay, and you leave on time, but you forget your phone. So you was on time to be there at 8 from your dorm. You run back in the house. You forget your phone. You run back in the house. You grab it, and that kind of took three minutes away from your timeline. On this delayed walk, you witness a car accident. But a car accident happened because the driver was momentarily detracted by you. Did you cause the car accident? Did your tardiness describe the car accident? If you had came on time, would you have not run across that driver that somehow paid attention to you that caused the accident? Well, let's keep it going. You arrive at the bar. You're late though, 3 to 5 minutes late. You arrive at the bar just as your soulmate, the most attractive woman or man that you've seen ever comes at the door at the same time you come to the door. You lock eyes, you smile, you say hello to each other, you hit it off. And let's say for the sake of this argument, you eventually get married. This is a twist of what? Fate that you never seen coming. So now, let's look at how you apply this stuff. You're supposed to be here at 8. You left your phone. You went back to your room. You came back outside. You began your walk 3 to 4, 5 minutes late. Stuff happened 3, 4, 5 minutes before you showed up, right? Another way of looking at that or saying that you were late, but if you were on time, stuff would have happened, but not the stuff that happened because you were late. And so now that you were late, everything in the order has changed, or has it? The accident happened because that car that you would have avoided 3 minutes ago shows up in that moment that you finally come, looks at you, somehow distracted by you, and gets into an accident. That accident wouldn't have occurred if you were what? On time. The fine man, the fine sister that you saw, that you walked in the station one with, if you were on time, you would have been there with your friends. But you were late, so they were already in there. So you come in with this person. If you were on time, you may have never seen that person in the bar. You certainly wouldn't have been that close to that person, which then allowed you what? To communicate, keep talking, eventually fall in love. What would a determinist says? Every action in your chain of events was caused by prior conditions. Your memory lapse, I forgot my phone. Your timing, the driver's split second distraction. You had no control over it. It was gonna happen either way, whether you was on time or not. And so you can't say, man, if you'd only what? If you're a determinist, it happened according to how it was supposed to happen. That makes sense, right? So for a determinist, every action in your chain of events was caused by prior conditions. And what it looks is your memory lapse, you're running late, all that kind of stuff, right? So I forgot my phone, that kind of thing, right? So everything that happened, you had no control over it. It was going to happen. Now, what would a compatibilist say? Well, you chose to go back for your phone because what? You wanted it. You could have kept walking. Forgot your phone. Now, of course, y'all ain't gonna forget y'all phone, right? But theoretically, you didn't have to go back to get your phone. You could have kept walking, met your friends, been on time, and everything else would have not happened. No external force compelled you what? To go back to your room. So your actions, according to a compatibilist, reflected your internal state and your internal desire, not anything cosmic, not anything according to uh, deterministic order. Even if the overall sequence was set, the compatibilist said you made a free choice, right? In a meaningful sense. Then, of course, so remember how that works. Compatibilist, it could be a little bit of both my agency, my freedom, as well as some stuff that was kind of naturally ordered. Then the libertarian would say, well, perhaps at some point you made a sort of an undetermined choice that kind of diverged from any prior causal sequence. But now, what did that do? It forged a new path, a new set of events that led you to meet your future spouse, right? So then you made a choice that changed the order of things, but now you met your new husband. So I'm gonna give you about 2, 3 people, and let me move on out of here. Hobbes, right? Think of Thomas Hobbes, 16th century, right? He was a soft determinist guy, believed that liberty was important and simply was the absence of external kind of impediments, right? Uh, People are brutish, right? They're brutish because they want to be brutish, right? So Thomas Hobbes was a libertarian. Um, a philosopher like David Hume, who we call an empiricist, he was a sort of a component of compatibilism, right? And so he even described in one of his writings that free will, says free will is acting in accordance to one's nature, right? Right. So he's kind of a compatible, right? And then Immanuel Kant, of course, you know I talk about him a lot. You know, in Love That Desire, we've talked about him. Um, Kant argues that while natural phenomena follow determinism, moral law and rational agency suggest a sort of freedom, right? So at the end of my intro class, at the end of there's there's an assignment that you have due, I think, of the 21st. You're to watch a film called The Adjustment Bureau. I love that film. I don't love it, but I like it. But I like it for academic purposes, really. The Adjustment Bureau has Matt Damon in it. It's pretty cool. The Adjustment Bureau. I think that's due on the 21st or something. So just make sure you look at that in Moodle. The Adjustment Bureau, we see an agency, right, orchestrating human events, kind of like cosmic determinism. Yet, you see protagonists strive to exercise free will. Again, not unlike Final Destination, but it's a different type of movie. We ain't got no death like that in the Adjustment Bureau movie. And these protagonists try to break away from determinism by exercising free will, seeing if they can break the plan, right? So it's like the question: do we remain bound, right, by a universal script, or can we flip the script? Can we edit the narrative? Right? Can we break the chain? Right? Just like this station one example, we see how slight deviations of timing can alter our entire lives. So incompatibilists would say determinism and free will cannot both be true, thus leading to hard determinism or libertarianism. And compatibilists argue that they can exist together. This debate, this argument, spans for years because the stakes are really high, intellectually anyway. Whether you like the Final Destination series, or hopefully intro students you'll like the Adjustment Bureau, real life scenarios like dashing back to your phone for your phone before meeting the man or woman of your dreams, or neuroscientific experiments probing the entire timing of our decisions. These big questions remain, right? Are we masters of our own fate, captains of our destiny, or are we unwilling and maybe even unwitting actors in a cosmic drama that maybe, in the words of DJ Khaled, God did and not you? Whichever side you take, one fact remains: grappling with free will and determinism forces us to confront the deepest layers of who we are and how we choose to live. And it is, for philosophers like me, it is our ongoing quest for meaning and what makes the difference in this world. Hope that helps. Take care. Stay strong.